Welcome to Purpose of Heart, the podcast, where real stories meet God's promises. I'm Priscilla Allman, and every week we dive into powerful conversations about purpose in the pressure through caregiving, illness, grief, addiction, and more. If you've ever asked, God, where are you in this? You're in the right place. Be sure to follow the show, and let's find purpose together. Hello, and welcome back to Purpose of Heart, the podcast. I'm your host, Priscilla Allman, and today we're going to talk about something subtle. Not obvious fear, not panic, not dramatic anxiety, but the quiet kind. The kind that disguises itself as wisdom, the kind that sounds more mature, the kind that feels responsible. Today's conversation is called How Fear Sneaks Into Responsible Decisions. Because sometimes what we label as being careful is actually fear quietly steering the wheel. And if we're honest, it's easy to miss. Fear rarely announces itself loudly. It doesn't usually say, "I'm afraid," although it can. Instead, it says, "I'm just being realistic. I'm protecting my peace. I'm being wise. I don't want to make a mistake." And while wisdom is biblical, sometimes fear can mimic it. James 1:5 says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him." Wisdom comes from God. Fear comes from insecurity. The two can look kind of similar on the surface, but they feel very different underneath. Wisdom is steady. Fear is anxious. Wisdom is prayerful. Fear is pressured. Wisdom trusts God with outcomes. Fear tries to control them. Let's slow down and make this personal. Have you ever declined an opportunity? Not because God said no, but because you were afraid of failing? Have you ever stayed small because growth felt risky? Have you ever overthought something simply because you were trying to eliminate every possible negative outcome? Fear often hides itself in phrases like, "What if it doesn't work? What if I'm not ready? What if this costs too much? What if I look foolish?" But here's the truth. You can make a safe decision for a wrong reason. And that reason might be fear. 2 Timothy 1:7 reminds us, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind." Fear doesn't come from God. A sound mind does. Notice something powerful here. A sound mind is not the same as a fearful one. A sound mind evaluates wisely. A fearful mind assumes the worst. But I just want to go back to that verse for a second, because not only has he not given us a spirit of fear, but he's given us one of power, of love, and of a sound mind. If we really took hold of that verse, what would we do differently? If we really took hold of having a spirit of power, a spirit of love and of a sound mind, how would that potentially change our everyday actions and interactions? Many of us pride ourselves on being responsible. We plan, we prepare, we analyze, we research. And in a lot of ways, it's a good thing to do. None of those things are inherently wrong. But there's a subtle shift that can happen from responsibility to self-reliance. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Fear leans heavily on its own understanding. Trust leans on God. Sometimes we say we're being responsible, but in reality, we haven't actually invited God into the situation or to the decision. We've run projections, we've calculated risks, we've asked opinions. But have we surrendered the outcome? Because responsible living without trust can quietly become controlled living. And controlled living is often fear-driven. Let's be honest about something. Fear doesn't just avoid danger. It also avoids discomfort. It avoids vulnerability. It avoids rejection, uncertainty, stretching, and growth. But growth always requires change and risk. Hebrews 11:6 says, "But without faith it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him." Faith requires movement, and movement always carries some level of uncertainty. If a decision keeps you completely safe from any discomfort, it may also keep you from obedience. That doesn't mean recklessness, but it does mean surrender. And there's a difference. Let's look at an example. In Matthew 19, there is a rich young ruler. He comes to Jesus. He's moral, he's responsible, he's successful, he's obedient, and Jesus tells him to sell all that he has and to follow him. And scripture says that this rich young ruler went away sorrowful. Why? Because the cost felt too high. On paper, his decision to walk away on some accounts may seem responsible, right? He was protecting his assets, protecting his stability, protecting his future. But beneath that, he didn't want to lose what he had. And sometimes we hold on to what feels secure because trusting God feels risky. But faith always asks, what is God inviting me into, even if it stretches me? So how do we tell the difference, right? How do we know if we're walking in wisdom or reacting from fear? And there's a few markers that we can use. One is that wisdom is anchored in peace. Colossians 3:15, "And let the peace of God rule in your hearts." The word rule means to act as an umpire. Peace officiates wise decisions. Fear produces pressure. If a decision is driven by panic, urgency, or dread, pause. God rarely leads through anxiety. Wisdom invites wise counsel but doesn't hide behind it. Proverbs 11:14, "Where there is no counsel, the people fall, but in the multitude of counselors there is safety." Seeking counsel is wise. but fear hides behind endless opinions. If you've asked 10 people because you're hoping someone will remove your discomfort, that may not be wisdom. That may be avoidance. Wisdom aligns with God's character. God is not intimidated by growth. He's not surprised by stretching. He doesn't call you forward just to abandon you. Isaiah 41:10. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. When God calls you forward, he promises his presence. Fear says, what if I fall? Faith says, if I fall, he will uphold me. Let's make this practical. The next time you're making a responsible decision, ask, am I moving towards obedience or away from discomfort? Is this choice rooted in trust or worst case scenarios? Have I truly surrendered this to God or just calculated it? If fear were removed, would I still choose this? Psalm 56:3. Whenever I am afraid, I will trust in you. Notice it doesn't say if I am afraid. It says whenever. Fear may show up, but it doesn't get to lead. Here's the beautiful part. When you let go of fear disguised as responsibility, something shifts. You breathe differently, you move differently, and you stop trying to guarantee outcomes, and you start walking in trust. Isaiah 26:3 says, you will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. Peace follows trust. Not certainty, not full visibility, trust. God never promised you a risk-free life, but he did promise his presence. And his presence is greater than anyone's projections. And one way that you can do this is you can ask him, Lord, where are areas where fear has been quietly steering my decisions? Where have I labeled anxiety as wisdom? Where have I done calculations, sought external counsel before I asked you and heard from you? We can ask him to give us courage where we're hesitant, because he's willing to fill in and be everything that we need. So as we go into this week, remember that responsible decisions are good, but faith-filled decisions are better. We're not created to live in constant self-protection. We're created to walk in partnership with God. Fear may whisper, but it doesn't get to decide. Trust does. And when trust leads, peace follows. Until next time, thanks for joining us for another episode of Purpose of Heart, the podcast. We're here to remind you that wisdom is steady, fear is subtle, but God is faithful in each and every step. Until next time, friends. Thanks for listening to Purpose of Heart, the podcast at www.purposeofheartpodcast.com. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. There's so much more God is doing, and I don't want you to miss a thing. Thank you in advance for the reviews and shares. They help this message reach more hearts. I can't wait to walk with you again in next week's episode. See you there.